Now, Brother Moazzam, the point of discussion is that Donald Trump has come through and an executive order was reversed, and he says Guantanamo Bay needs to be open. There are other issues pertaining to cutting ties with Pakistan, couple of things that are happening around there. And you started off an article where you said 16 years ago you were taken by ISI and by CIA. What do you make of all of this? Is it a couple of things you need to put together to make the audience understand what exactly is happening here and why Donald Trump's reason to keep Guantanamo Bay open?
Well, alhamdulillah. The truth is that most people perhaps either don't know that Guantanamo Bay is still open or don't realize that it is still got it's got about 41 prisoners still there, and that the predecessor of Donald Trump, of course, Mr. Obama, said when he first came to power that he's going to close Guantanamo, he's going to stop torture, he's going to stop the CIA renditions program. He said all of these things, all of these promises he made. And, of course, it seems like the American people are bipolar, because on the one hand, you can pick a person who says these things, Obama, and then on the other hand, you pick somebody who does the exact opposite. So he's now signed, as you correctly said, an executive order saying that the place will not only remain open, but what he wants is new prisoners to come there. So from the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, there are potentially now going to be more prisoners coming to Guantanamo Bay if Donald Trump has his way. Donald Trump, of course, is the same man who's also said that he believes torture works. He believes waterboarding, which is a medieval torture technique that was used against Muslims during the Spanish Inquisition. He believes that is something good. He said he would use that and a lot more. And he said also that he wants to reopen the CIA torture rendition sites. Mm-hmm. Any lesson that may have been learned during the War on Terror, during the Bush and the Obama administration has been lost. And what we're seeing now is that essentially Trump is saying that because every prisoner in Guantanamo, the first condition is you must be a Muslim, and then the second condition is being a terrorism suspect. Nobody will really care because you can do these type of things to Muslim prisoners nowadays.
Mm. So, Brother Moazzam, do you think from the time you've been there, when there was this big rush of a discussion and the issue of what Guantanamo was like, it was evil in every single respect, in the way they were conducting themselves, the very torturous approach and so forth. Do you believe from then up to now that, it could have been watered down a little? So yes, Guantanamo is infamous for the name it has, but then it may not be the same as when you people were out there receiving the worst of ever treatment.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to note this, that Guantanamo isn't the worst prison in the world. It's the most notorious one. There's a difference. The worst prisons in the world, in my view, are some of them, sadly, in the Muslim world. And these are the places where the Americans were sending people or threatening to send them. They threatened to send me to Egypt or to Syria at that time if I didn't cooperate. They did send people, multiple people, to Egypt, to Syria, to Libya, and so forth, where some people turned up dead in their prison cells. Others were tortured in ways that it's difficult to describe, that even the Americans wouldn't have done. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind at all that there are things that the Americans themselves wouldn't do, but they were happy to pass these individuals over, knowing that these torture centers were places where these techniques were mastered. And one case, if there's one case any of your audience, your listeners can ever remember, our invasion of Iraq was based on the torture of a man called Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi. Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi was a Libyan dissident who was allegedly an Al-Qaeda captive. The Americans took him into custody. They sent him alive in a coffin eventually to Egypt, where he was tortured under President Hosni Mubarak. And there he gave a false confession under torture after being waterboarded and electrocuted that Saddam Hussein was working with Al-Qaeda on getting chemical weapons. The United States took this information to the United Nations Security Council in 2003 and argued for a case for invading Iraq based on this false information. This same individual, Ibn Sheikh al-Libi, then ended up in a prison cell in Libya where they sent him to, and he turned up dead in his cell in 2009. So that's why we invaded Iraq, based on this torture. And it seems like no lesson has been learnt at all, because as we know, Iraq then was completely dismantled. And what we see today happening in Iraq is a consequence of what happened through the torture of this man.
Yes, absolutely. And just having said all of this and talking about the worst prisons, explaining that to us, there was a book, I think, called Grace Plain. I think that if I can remember well, where this whole book starts off with a description of what type of torture was meted out, where Bashar al-Assad was a very close ally of the United States and many of these countries fighting war on terror, and people would be sent there, for the type of torture clearly defined in that book as how the tortures were carried out and so forth, going back to that. And even the planes that were carrying, all that was recorded as to the flights that were going in and out, as to all the places. It was a very detailed book talking about, all of these issues. But now, Brother Moazzam, coming from, on that, since you're mentioning about Libya, is there any way that you could maybe just touch on just a very brief moment on that, the issue about whilst you were in prison, and maybe, possibility of Afia Siddiqui being there. Is there anything just very briefly that you could touch on that particular one?
Yeah, I mean, just in relation to the book that you mentioned is called Ghost Plane. It's by
Ghost Plane, yes.
Stephen Gray, and he highlighted, he highlighted all of the countries that people renditioned to, and that's important because the case myself and others, hundreds of us, were renditioned. I was living in Pakistan at the time in 2002. Americans and Pakistani CIA agents turned up at my doorstep and. Literally, when I opened the door at midnight, when they knocked on it, they burst in with guns and electric tasers and threw me onto the ground, tied my hands behind my back and my legs and so forth, and put a hood over my head, carried me away off into secret detention sites, and then eventually to American military custody in Afghanistan. This was a process that was applied on me and literally hundreds of other people. One of the places where I ended up by the Americans and in American custody was the Bagram detention facility. In this place, I saw two people murdered. I mean, murdered by the American soldiers, punched and kicked to death while they were saying Allah on their lips. And during this period, of course, I heard the screams of a woman, and I didn't know it at the time. But I learned later, after my release, that indeed Afia Siddiqui had been held in the Bagram detention facility. I don't know if it's her screams I heard or it was a different woman's scream that I heard, but she was definitely held there. And as time went on, we investigated myself, Yvonne Ridley, Imran Khan, and many other people started getting involved in the case, and eventually uncovered that she had been handed over by the Pakistani government, like us, like many of the other men, and then been accused of things that nobody else was accused of. Because if you're accused of a crime, you should be prosecuted for that crime in the country where you committed that crime. She was taken to America, and none of the evidence that was uncovered was presented in her case, and she was given an 86-year sentence for the allegedly attempting to murder an American soldier while she was in custody. So all of that happened, of course, and the rendition program was going on simultaneously. So people from all over the world, literally from Azerbaijan, from Zambia, from Indonesia, from wherever you can think of, were being picked up, tortured, abused, sent over to different countries, to Egypt, to Morocco, and so forth, and then eventually to Bagram, and then from Bagram, the final destination, Guantanamo Bay. And ironically, Guantanamo probably was the best of the worst in all of that journey for people.
Brother Moazzam, would you, in your assessment, I don't want to use the word judgment, but in your assessment of what has happened, maybe even to Libya, of any of the Guantanamo Bay inmates, would you have excused them if they had rendered false information because of the type of torture that you people went through with the water? Was it very, very strenuous, very difficult, very traumatic, the type of torture that Guantanamo offered at that time? And if anybody succumbed or, gave off false information, would you, in your assessment, allow for that?
Of course. I mean, there's no sense that anybody could do anything otherwise. I mean, if you're being tortured in ways that you can't describe, if you're being cruelly, inhumanely, and degradingly treated, if you're being stripped naked, if you're I mean, some of the first things that we saw was that they took the Quran in front of us and they'd rip it into pieces and then throw it into the toilet in front of our eyes and urinate on it and all of these things. On top of that, the forced degradation, the forced humiliation, being stripped naked, being forcibly shaved, being your hair forcibly shaved, all of that, in addition to the fact that you don't know what happened to your family, you don't know when you're going to see them again, you don't know whether there's any legal process, no charges, no lawyers, no prosecutors, nothing. So in the midst of all of that, if somebody gives a false confession or says something that's wrong and just to try to save themselves, it's completely understandable. The famous Sahabi Ammar bin Yasir, he said, even though his heart didn't believe it, when he was being tortured at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that Hubal is his God. And the verse in the Quran was revealed about when somebody is forced to say something that he doesn't believe in his heart, then he's absolved. And so I see it in that same light.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so very, very traumatic and difficult moments. Now, coming to this discussion about Pakistan, that particular relationship between the United States of America and Pakistan, what has happened to it? Is it a type of strategy that America is using now? Why isolate Pakistan specifically? Why cut the type of funds they are giving them? How do you look at all of that, Brother Moazzam?
Because if there's any single country that literally sold itself to the United States of America and its sovereignty, it was Pakistan. First of all, when the bombing of Afghanistan began in 2001, the Americans used Pakistani airspace. The Americans had several, and still have several, military bases on Pakistani soil, which, they don't attack India from that soil. That soil is used. Those bases are used to attack people in the northwest frontier, in the Waziristan region, in Afghanistan at that time. So, and then later on, of course, the renditions program was taking place right through Pakistan. As a result of that, undoubtedly, the terrorism rose in Pakistan in ways that it never happened before in the history of Pakistan. Whilst on the one hand, the Pakistani ISI was involved with the CIA in literally enforced disappearances, picking up people from their homes, and you would never see them. Their relatives would never see them again for the next 10 to 15 years in some cases, to the actual war being conducted now in the northwest frontier, the creation of the Pakistani Taliban, the fact that now that Islamic State is present in Pakistan. None of these things happened, and they've only happened because Pakistan pursued a policy of the United States of America, which had led to its internal dismemberment and destruction. So rather than saying Pakistan hasn't done enough to fight terror, what they should be saying is that Pakistan has broken its back in trying to fight our wars for us, and we are unthankful, therefore we are going to cut off funding to this country. I think it's the best thing could have happened to Pakistan, because finally now they can look to other regions and say we need to take our influence and financial support from other more localized players rather than the United States, whose policies we follow, and we pay a massive price at the end of it. Literally tens of thousands of people have been killed in Pakistan in pursuit of this war that's been created.
And if you look at the United States of America right now, Brother Moazzam, and how they have responded to all that is happening, would there be a turnaround now where, like I said earlier, there may have been some ease that, look, Guantanamo is going to be closed. But Donald Trump has come on the scene. This man's taking it up right up front, and saying exactly what he feels like saying and who he wants to say to. Do you think there could be a change if you take a popularity vote or maybe a polls, you do some sort of vox pop or anything like that in the United States of America? Do you think there is a greater support now for more of the Muslim people to come in and go back into Guantanamo?
I think currently when it has to be seen in the light of Donald Trump's populism. So if you see the types of people that voted for him and supported him, some of the people that came out openly in his support were the Ku Klux Klan. The others around the world, whether it's nationalist movements, for example, in India, you've got supporters of the Modi government and the extreme nationalist Hindu parties came out in support of Donald Trump, even though his other supporters in the United States are racist and would hate those Indians. But he's kind of galvanized those sorts of people around the world with views that are very I wouldn't even say conservative, but they're very xenophobic, very anti-Islamic. If you look at, despite the fact that there are multiple cases of violence by far-right extremists taking place on the United States soil, Donald Trump wants to change the countering violent extremism program to countering Islamic extremism program. He wants to take all of the far-right out of it, and he wants to focus completely on how bad Muslims are. And that's why he's had his Muslim ban and so forth. So when you build all of that up and you build up the language against Muslims and that they are violent and that they are backwards, then keeping Guantanamo open, sending new prisoners there becomes so much easier because the population believes what you're saying. And of course, that is something that has been said in one way or another since the Bush administration. And the difference between the Bush administration and the Trump is that Bush, when it came to the issue of torture, never said that we justify or believe in torture. Now with the Trump administration, he said not only do we believe in torture, we believe torture works. And so torturing these Muslim folk is quite a viable option because they are such a vile group of people. And so that's why he's reintroducing every single program that in any other country, I mean, let's make it absolutely clear, what he's done when he says he endorses torture is endorse war crimes, and there needs to be prosecutions against people like him and those people who've been involved in the torture programs.
Brother Moazzam, I've got two more questions early before I leave you. Sometimes,
sure.
It'll be of great help for us to, especially South Africa's got 2 cases at the moment. We get regular report with Sister Karen Jays from Cape, South Africa. She speaks to us quite often. We have 2 brothers, twins, who are sitting in prison. And there's one that is, a family, siblings, a boy and a young man and his sister. But the modus operandi and the system is, and maybe you can help us on this one, the repeated postponement of the cases, repeatedly postponement, keeping people a longer time in the prison. Is this the manner in which they go about that? Because there's very little content and substance in the court appearances, excepting that afterwards you postpone for a further period. And the twins are still in prison. I think it's now going for probably the 3rd year almost. And whilst the other 2 are doing regular court appearances, but we don't seem to get anything coming out of these cases.
I don't know enough about the details of the case. I know Sister Karen is leading on this from Cage. But what I can say is clearly from what you said is that
you were explaining?
Sorry, as I was saying. So the concept of a speedy trial is something that most Western nations, in fact, every Western nation, and I think South Africa would count itself in terms of its justice system in line with that, is that people cannot be sitting in prison for 3 years, 2 years, or even a year waiting for trial, because what if you're found not guilty at the end of that? What happens then to that year or the 2 years or the 3 years? You've just spent a large portion of your youth in prison for a crime that you have been found not guilty of. So 3 years waiting trial on remand is unacceptable. It's outrageous, especially when there is you will be deemed as the law says about the presumption of innocence, that you are innocent until proven guilty. Well, if you're in prison until proven guilty or not, and that means you've been dealt with as if you are already guilty. And I say this as somebody who's gone through this process myself, knowing that prison, by its very nature, even if you're exonerated at the end of it, people will think, well, if you were innocent, then why did you go to prison? And so this is the major problem about somebody being in prison for such a long time. And I guess that this is the problem with the case of the Tulsi brothers, and it's the case in many others around the world where people are being picked up, and due process is not being applied in the way that it should.
Finally, Brother Moazzam, just some bit of advice for us, any much better for the Ummah? In what's happening around now with Donald Trump and all the utterances and everything, a little more difficult, I don't know, sometimes, how people, like us and the many listeners out there believe we should be conducting ourselves. What is then considered to be something against the state? What is terrorism? What's Islamophobia? A whole lot of things, Is there more, do you believe, some added type of activity that makes it much more difficult for Muslims to practice their Islam, wherever they are living?
I think that it's important for us to understand and recognize that part of us being Muslims means by its very nature we will be tested, and that the difficult road will come ahead. We should never choose the difficult road in anything, but if it's there in front of us, we need to be firm. There's a beautiful dua the Prophet ﷺ used to make, Allahumma ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik. Oh Allah, the turner of the hearts, make my heart firm on your faith. And it's one that we need to say constantly, because as we see the anti-Islamic rhetoric and actions around the world by those who claim to be the defenders of human rights and democracy are rising on every day. The only one thing I can say good about people like Trump is that he's quite open about what he says and believes. And an open adversary is always much more preferable than the one that is hidden and pretends to be your friend. So I think in that regard, we should be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we can see at least those individuals and people who wish to harm Islam and Muslims, and we can internally and externally prepare ourselves for that, for spiritually and in other ways. One of the things my organization, Cage, has been doing since the outset isn't just documenting and campaigning for the prisoners in Guantanamo or anti-terror legislation in the UK, but also to empower our community through the stories of the former prisoners, through the stories of the survivors. And that is something I think that we know as Muslims throughout our history, those people who've suffered, protected our faith, protected the people, and protected our dignity.
Yes. And Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, from tomorrow at 9:30 every day for the next 7 days, we'll be running the Cage UK series. What Dr. Adnan Siddiqui was chairing, and the issue of many people, basically titled 4 Imams, on the issue of the oppression and injustice that took place even in that time. Brilliant piece of story, what a Medina student from Medina University and what transpired in his life. Also coming up, inshallah, for the next 7 days. We'll be playing at 9:30 every day, one of those series until it is over. And we thank Cage UK for that. Jazakallah khairan so much, Brother Moazzam. Allah reward you abundantly for the time you have given us.
Absolutely.
Shukran jazeelan, my brother. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.